Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two and devoted homemaker. Join me on this journey as we explore the beauty of slow and simple living, where life unfolds at its own unhurried pace. I'll take you through my experiences of slowing down, tending to our allotment plot, finding joy in the little things and making the most of our small home. Together we'll learn to live in harmony with the ever-changing seasons, discovering the magic that lies in embracing the present moment. So let's embark on this enriching adventure towards a more intentional and fulfilling life. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, and if you're new here, welcome, and if you're not new here and you're returning, welcome back. Today I want to dive into something that I think is on all of our minds, and that is how to prepare for winter and the season of stillness. Now, there is often this moment, sometime in late autumn, where the light softens, and honestly it is just enough to make me stop what I'm doing. Where I live, I have the most beautiful view of the most beautiful sunsets all year round, but this always stops me in the autumn. It's that golden low in the sky kind of light that just comes in and reminds you that time is moving on, that the year is winding down and that winter is pretty much almost here. And when I feel that shift, I feel like it's this quiet cue from the earth, in fact, and that's when I start preparing, not just in obvious ways like maybe putting a thicker duvet on the bed or bringing out some blankets or checking that everything is working as it should in our house, but I start to prepare myself. So I prepare my mind and my nervous system. I think about our home rhythm, because winter for me it's a season to survive, of course, but it's not just that. It is a season to embrace the stillness, to take a reset, and to just have kind of like a long, deep exhale. And I wanted this episode to share how I prepare for that. It might give you some ideas. I just wanted to share how I choose to slow down as the world outside does too. And it's not about doing less or being lazy, as some people might frame it. It is about doing less to come home to myself and create a winter that feels warm and grounded and nourishing for me and my family, even in our tiny space. So let's start with the practical, because I think that is where most of us begin when we think of winter prep. And honestly, the stuff matters, right? So we live in a 650 square foot split level flat, and there is not a lot of wiggle room. So I often start by making sure the space feels cozy and calming. I clear the clutter, I put away all the summer and autumn things. I really have a bit of a deep clean, and it's almost like nesting in a way, like if you've ever been pregnant and carried a baby to full term, you get this like nesting feeling like, oh, before the baby comes I must clean all of the baseboards in the kitchen, because of course the baby's going to show up and judge the fact I haven't cleaned them. But it's just this nesting feeling. And obviously not because I'm expecting a baby, but because I'm expecting a new season, and it's a season that is going to keep us indoors more, and it will ask us to just be closer together. And I often bring out the blankets, we turn on the fairy lights, I make sure that all the lamps are working, and just make sure that our kitchen is ready as well and organised, and we have everything that we need. Not like we're not going to go out ever again, but just that we have everything we need indoors. I shift things around to make more space for play indoors. I, just create more comfort for more of the winter activities that we do. I tidy up the balcony. I make sure I get the last of the autumn harvest from the balcony and the allotment. Anything that can stay out, I shelter, and I just clear up. We get a lot of strong winds where we are, and particularly because we're up high, so we know, like across the UK, it can get pretty windy anyway through the winter anyway. We often have multiple winter storms, but I also live high up on a hill, and I also live on the second and third floor of the building. So it's a lot of height. It is a lot of height compared to the rest of the town. And I just make sure that everything is going to be secured and safe throughout the winter. I might move some of the empty pots that would be easily able to like take flight. I take them off to the garage and just get everything sheltered. And these are really small acts, but they really ground me, and they kind of say like, we're ready. Let's go for it. But winter prep is so much more than the physical, because I think as well for me, there's a lot of work in the mental and emotional too. And it's only in more recent years that I found winter more of a struggle to get through. When I was younger, I don't know, I just kind of got through it. But I don't know if it's since I've started to live more seasonally, or whether it's, just the passage of time. I'm not sure, but I just feel more like winter is a more difficult season. And I already just don't, I don't know, when I look ahead at winter, even back in the summer, I look ahead at winter and I'm like, no. I mean, there were some really hot days in the summer where I was like, God, I wish it was winter. But of course, everything in its own time. But like I say, there's a lot of emotional and mental work that goes into prepping for winter too, because winter isn't a season of productivity or hustle or performing. It's a season of letting go, of softening, of cocooning, and just stepping away from a culture that is always screaming that we need to do more or be more. So I always make sure in winter I intentionally step away from the noise. I do things like I start to simplify our routines. Not because we're giving up, but we're just embracing the season where it's at. And I look at our calendar, I keep it particularly light, I protect our morning time more in the winter, and I just give myself permission to stop trying to cram in everything. We don't need jam-packed schedules. And it's always funny so I have a digital calendar that I share with my husband on our phones, so we can pretty much just look back. It's just the regular calendar on our phone. And I often will look back, usually like this time of year, and I will just look at some of the things that have been in the calendar, and you can always see sort of like this natural ebb and flow, where it was very light at the beginning of the year while it was still winter, and then spring it sort of increased a bit, and then it was sort of much busier through summer, and then autumn just sort of peters off a bit, and then we're into winter and we're back to a very light schedule. And it's intentional. It's really intentional. We don't need a jam-packed schedule all day, every day, for the whole year. That's not natural to us. So when winter rolls round, it's a time where we just sort of really lean into that natural flow of the year. And we also do that in our home education as well, because we home educate both of our children. They are 4 and 6. And in winter, we don't push, we don't go so hard. We just go deeper on some things. We spend more time indoors naturally in the winter, but we're not trying to spread ourselves too thin. We just move through in a pace that works for us. And there's still the structure. We're not very structured in our home education, but the structure that we have, but it's very flexible and breathable. And I want my children to know that learning doesn't have to look a certain way, but it's also not just about ticking boxes. Sometimes it looks like us baking bread together and measuring ingredients in the kitchen, or sometimes it's going out for a winter walk and have the leaves crunch under our feet, or sometimes it's just a really natural question or conversation that leads to something deeper. And I feel like winter really gives us space for that kind of learning, and I try and really honour that. But also our family time changes too, because in the winter we obviously naturally spend more time together and we draw closer together. And as the days get darker, they get slower, and there's a lot of magic. I feel like I give winter a bad rap, but there's a lot of magic in winter, and more time with each other is always beneficial. And it's, we're not doing some big family bonding activity, but it's kind of like life naturally slows enough for us to sort of reconnect again from months that can sometimes be particularly busy, and where we don't necessarily have that feeling of connection that we do all the time, let's say. That's something we really work on in our home. And so, I find winter is just, personally for me as well, a time where I turn inward, I reflect, I reset myself, I spend more time working in the winter than I do in the summer. So, I'm very lucky in the way that I've built my business, in that I can work in the times that work for me. So I like to work through the winter, and I don't like to work through the summer. And sometimes I prepare well for that and sometimes I don't. But I often find that, through the summer, from May onwards, my whole life, maybe, and it's earlier as well, but I suppose by May the nights are really sort of drawing out, that we spend a lot of time, we'll be at the allotment in the evenings, we're prepping the allotment, we're out with friends. Life is just a lot more summer vibes, let's say. And I just, we'll take the kids for a walk, we'll have a late walk to the park, and it's so much free and easier than the winter. And so in the winter I really just play to my strengths, and while I do say no to more things, I also, I just know where I work best, and I know that the late spring, summer, early autumn is where I am where I want to be at that time, and that is with my family, with my children, with my friends. And when it comes around to winter, everybody's a lot more in hibernation mode, and so I can get more done, essentially. And so winter offers a lot in that respect. I still honour in the fact that it is a slower season and I don't push myself, but it just gives me a little bit more space. But also a time where I reset and I ask myself, what did I want to bring with me into the new year? Or, did I do everything I wanted to this year? Is there anything I need to leave behind? And I think there's a stillness in winter that actually allows us to ask those questions and then stop for long enough to hear the answer to. But I know winter isn't for everyone, and it can bring up a huge lot of discomfort. And like I said, I feel like I feel it more and more every year. The darkness, the heaviness, the stillness. It's not all coziness. And I see people online saying, oh, I love the Burr months, like September, October, November, December. And it's like, great, but for a lot of people they're really, really tough months, and I think it's really important to say that it's not all like cozy blankets and pumpkin spice lattes and cinnamon sticks. For some people it's really hard, and I do think it's really important to address that. And sometimes slowness feels lovely, and sometimes it feels like grief and like restlessness and like standing still when the world is moving. And so I think part of preparing for winter is making space for those feelings too, and not judging them. And I don't know if this is just a personal thing, and maybe why I've been finding winter difficult in more recent years, but I have this really the last few years have been really tough on our family. We have had loss. We lost my mother-in-law. That was late autumn, early winter, and so when you lose someone that time of year, you've then got winter is associated with or early winter at least is associated with getting things organised and funerals and things like that. And then last year we lost my granddad in mid-November, and again it means that lead up to Christmas and lead up to the end of the year, and that like end of autumn into early winter again is filled with loss and grief and organising things and funerals, and so it just brings a heaviness. It does bring a heaviness. And aside from that, we had a miscarriage that was in June, in between those two losses. So we lost my mother-in-law in 2023, and then I had a miscarriage, so at the end of 2023, and then I had a miscarriage in the middle of 2024, and then lost my granddad at the end of 2024. And so yeah, it does come with a bit of a heaviness, and I suppose going into winter and this time of year again, it has been, I've been apprehensive, I say, and maybe my feelings are connected to that. But I just remind myself that, you know, winter and this whole season, it is not supposed to look like spring. It is not supposed to be bright and blooming. It is supposed to be deep and quiet and messy. Trees don't bloom all year round, for the most part, unless they're evergreen. And neither do we. So I try and lean into it and stop expecting myself to be at full energy, and stop trying to match the pace of people who still try and live like it's an eternal summer. I try and stay in my lane, I honour the season I'm in, and I give myself grace. And I think it's a really important point that a lot of people, most of society, do live like the eternal summer. They do live with the hustle. They are trying to be on all the time, which is essentially why lots of people burn out eventually. And I'm not living like that, and I need to remind myself that I'm not living like that. And so when I see so-and-so, you know, still living at full pace in December, and then I chastise myself for not being that way, I have to remember why I'm not that way, and why I live the way I do, and why to me that is more important. So I do have to give myself that grace and ask myself, you know, what do I want to carry through winter? What do I need? What needs more light? What needs more rest? What could I just let go of completely? Because I think we think about winter as like stocking up and bracing ourselves, but I think it's also about releasing and softening our grip, and just trusting that even in the quiet, things are still happening, things are still growing, even if we can't see it yet. So I just want to remind you that, you know, it's okay to be slower. It is important that you're slower. It's part of living seasonally, and you know, the light is fading and the stillness is settling in. And I want to share a few things how I prepare. You know, I clean my home, of course, and prepare in that way, but I also clear my mental clutter, and I warm the space that I'm in, but I also warm the energy that surrounds it. And I slow down the rhythm, and it's not because I'm falling behind, but because I choose to do that. And I prioritise rest and rituals, not because I'm lazy, but because I understand that winter is not a performance. It is not spring, and it is not summer. And so I want to invite you to do the same. As winter comes upon us, I want you to prepare, not with panic, but with the idea of being present through the next season, and to trust in the slowness, and to welcome the quiet, and to try and create a winter that isn't endured but is lived through. And it's not that easy for everyone. I really do appreciate that, but I do hope that this has provided some sort of idea and comfort on how we can transition through the next season if we find it difficult. So I want to say thank you for listening to today's episode. As always, you can find me over on Instagram at The Slow Living Collective. You can also find me on Substack. That's theslowlivingcollective.substack.com. And I will catch you in my next episode.